In our fourth episode discussing the pillars of Washington's 6 principles, we will be exploring the concept of education. Let's find out what education means, how it's under threat, and some of the things we can do to advance the institution and the lifelong pursuit of learning. Let's begin. Patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm so glad that you're here with me today to talk about another pillar of Washington's 6 principles, education. Thank you so much for listening alongside with me. And if you like this episode and podcast, as a kind reminder, please make sure that you subscribe and share with your friends and family. As we all know, education is key to almost anything we do. I would say good education is really what we're going for. Quality education that teaches us to expand our skills and to explore new opportunities. Education is what gives us purpose. There's an old Chinese expression, 活到老，学到老, which in English means we live till we age and we learn till we age, which symbolizes that learning is a lifelong pursuit. It's a pursuit that no one can take away from us. Let's get started with a simple analogy and example of why education is so fundamental in our livelihoods. Many of you might remember one of the first biology experiments you've ever tried, whether biology class or maybe on your own, and that was growing your first plant. I'll never forget that time when I planted that seed in a small cup of soil. I watered it every day. You put it next to the window or under the sun, and as time goes by, you have your science journal, you're recording your observations, you're recording everything you're doing to take care of that plant. And then you start to see the seed grow, start to see some roots, and you start to see the actual stem and the leaves spring out from the soil. When I was a little kid, I thought that was one of the most amazing things I could witness. Even though there were plenty of plants out there, and I knew that gardening was a thing. However, that was really the first time I got to really experience what I considered at that time as my world of science. And maybe you had the same feeling or similar feeling too. Now imagine that you had to take care of not just one plant, but multiple plants, maybe tens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of plants, like a farmer. Think about all the farmers who go out there every day to grow food that eventually lands at our table. Think about how much effort it takes to maintain all those plants. Everything from the sunlight, the water, the fertilizer, all the steps needed to cultivate and to grow a plant or multiple plants. Now, what does this have to do with education? No, it's not to prove that I know first grade science, although, for the record, I have passed first grade science a long time ago when I was in first grade, but it means something different here. It's the portrayal of cultivation as education. This leads to my first point and first takeaway of this episode, which is that quality education is quality cultivation, and it can only be discovered by each individual. As a metaphor, it means that we don't just focus on one thing that we want to be good at and leave everything else behind. We're constantly finding new ways to grow our expertise in multiple areas. And this is going to require us to look for different sources of learning. We start with the basics, like speaking, writing, thinking, and we build on them. But the fundamental layer below all this is that will to learn and that curiosity that drives people to want to learn more and to want to build upon those skills. As many of you know, this podcast is named Friends and Fellow Citizens, which is the first few words of George Washington's farewell address in 1796. And as you read about Washington, you realize that he wasn't perhaps the stereotypical exceptional founding father who had everything he wanted in early life. In fact, he was actually often mocked by contemporaries at the time for not having a very solid education. But Washington, I think, knew that education had to go much broader than just schooling. I mean, he did finish basic math, basic writing, and other skills. But there are two key lessons that he learned that I think are really vital to our exploration of this topic of education. The first is the respect for superiors. I think that's a really interesting lesson. When you think about what that means, right? Central to that idea is that everyone wants to feel important. This is kind of a Dale Carnegie sort of lesson that I took away from his reading and something that he articulates very clearly in his writing. But the respect for superiors is really a fundamental concept. When we think about having respect for superiors, it shows that not only do you respect their particular status, whatever that status may be, of age or power and whatnot, but also shows that you care about others, that you care about calling people their respective names because you believe that they are central in their own minds. And I think that's what Washington really wanted to get out of it. And that's one of the big reasons why he was able to navigate the world of politics from a very young age to becoming the commander-in-chief, our first president of the United States. The next lesson he learned, which connects with the previous one I just mentioned, is humility, having a sense that you are not the only important person in the world. And that can be really hard. That's hard for everyone from podcasters like myself to the United States Senator from California to the owner of a restaurant. Perhaps the most difficult part of feeling important is knowing that other people also feel important at the same time. I think to have that humility is something that we might have lost very much in our society. Nowadays, when you think about social media as an example, instead of learning about why other people feel particular ways or why certain people pursue power to do X and Y, we just put ourselves on a pedestal and we proclaim that we got all the facts, that everyone has to agree with me, that everyone has to subscribe to our perspective. And I've noticed that whether you're in DC or anywhere else, when people realize that their self-worth is under threat, they will do whatever it takes in either a civil way or, unfortunately, in harmful ways to seize that back and to reaffirm that they are important, not us, not me. And interestingly, the title of the main book that Washington learned from is called The Rules of Civility, which ties back into another principle of Washington's 6 principles, which I've outlined in this podcast, something that we will cover in a lot more detail later on. But just as a quick mention, education and civility really tied together during Washington's career. And maybe that's the kind of education that we need, which is that an education that is tied to behavior which we often call for, but may not be able to execute to the best of our ability. I think about what is happening in our discourse right now. While it may not be purely education in the sense that it's a classroom, but I think the role model of our leaders has been increasingly important, especially in the midst of social media. When we think about what is going on in politics nowadays, we see a lot of back and forth. We see politicians kind of trying to score points or try to look like, they're the better person, or that the other person looks dumb or whatever. Where does that lead? That doesn't lead to more knowledge. That certainly doesn't make anyone feel great about themselves. I mean, yeah, sure. On the one hand, people could argue that if I made my point and everyone else hears what I have to say, then that's the best thing ever. Well, I really don't think that's going to be the solution to our problems. If everyone did that, no one would be listening. No one would make any progress. So I think what the founders really wanted us to reflect on, given the provisions and the stipulations within our Constitution, is that within the common theme of freedom of speech and the concept of learning and having different and diverse viewpoints, is the idea that no idea can be set in stone. In other words, being official by the government. That is why we have free speech. That's why we have to ensure that we retain this environment of learning. And with learning is going to include some things like being offended. I'm not going to lie with you. There are things out there that offend me, that offend you, that offend a number of people. But if no one could be allowed to offend anybody, no one would be able to say anything. And this leads to my second point of this episode, and that is that our education systems are increasingly becoming echo chambers. And you know where echo chambers are? They're places where learning ceases to exist. I mentioned social media just a little ago, but unfortunately it doesn't stop or start at social media. I think one of the saddest trends that I'm seeing right now, and something that I alluded to a few episodes ago, is the demise of learning on our college campuses. One of the reasons why we are in this stuck cycle of divisiveness and of people not learning or expanding their mindset, I think it's partly because we perpetuate this idea that if you want to be successful, you have to go to college. And you have to go to college because if you don't, people will somehow look at you as lower class or someone who is not perhaps exposed to different ideas, and all the same old. The ironic thing is that college campuses nowadays seem like the worst place to learn anything. We essentially have coddled the minds. An author named Jonathan Wright has written a great book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it's a book that talks about why people, even with the best intentions, are stirring up really, really detrimental divisiveness. And this political correctness aspect of college campuses is really disgusting. And we're seeing the most vile aspects of human nature that we probably have never, ever seen before. Things like speech codes, microaggressions being things that supposedly are offending people, and people need to be so-called aware of them or something. And then we got these safe spaces where people supposedly won't get offended. They got these trigger warnings as kind of a bit of an alarm system for all of this. This is just so nonsense. And it's so harmful to our discourse that I really do not believe that college campuses at this time are a source of education overall. I'm not saying all of it, but I think a lot of it really has become very toxic. Just remember 2 years ago, about almost 4 years ago now, a conservative speaker named Milo Yiannopoulos was invited to speak for the College Republicans chapter. And what ensued was just utter barbaric and un-American activity. There were windows shattered, there were fires, there was chanting, there was profanity, just the worst of humanity. And I really am concerned that unfortunately was not an isolated incident. We have seen multiple instances, predominantly, and I'm just saying because of ideology-wise, predominantly because of particular professors who are very much on the left-wing side of the spectrum trying to shut down people who have more right-wing views. And that's a real problem. Don't quote me on this. Also think of the people on the left who are calling out this vile culture. If you look up on the internet, Van Jones of CNN, not a conservative man of many standards, but someone who also calls out this cancel culture. Even President Barack Obama, in a speech to high school students in Iowa in 2015, was saying that when he was in college, he was exposed to different viewpoints that he didn't agree with, that he might have been offended by. But that doesn't mean you shut the speech down. And I'm going to include that clip in the show notes below because I really think that's important. That's coming from the Commander-in-Chief, the 44th President of the United States. And maybe the students at the time didn't know exactly what he was saying, but we have seen that really escalate, and that's really problematic. And I think the other flip side, though, is that we can't just say this is just, something for the right wing. I will say there are instances, for example, there was a professor at a Texas college up in the Dallas area who had said some pretty bad things about Vice President Pence, clearly someone who is very, very left-wing, and said some things that I think are completely unacceptable in political discourse. But here's the thing, though. That professor was talking at a personal level, not in a professional level. This professor, as far as I know, as far as news reporting goes, did not impose that view on anyone in the classroom. That professor was just saying it on Twitter or some other social media site. And the college had reprimanded the professor. They said that it was unacceptable, that it went against their code of conduct. And I thought to myself, said, this is not a typical example of perhaps the free speech debate. Part of education shouldn't be for the school administration to wield its power to shut down someone's personal speech. I think what the professor said was abhorrent. I don't think anyone should have said things the way the professor said. But at the same time, the school is also entering bad grounds here because it's not the authority of the school to control the personal speech of a professor. I think that raises an interesting debate, and maybe this is an example of how our debate and our fight to preserve education in our college campuses is not about left or right. It's about standing for the values of the First Amendment. And I don't care what people's perspectives are on certain issues. If people can rally around this idea that college campuses have to be places of free speech, as any other forms in the United States, the only free speech zone in the United States is the border around the United States. That's the free speech zone. If we can rally around from different parts of the political spectrum on allowing people to voice their opinions, even if those opinions are dumb or crazy, which also could be very subjective, as you know, then I think we have made progress. We have expanded the education sphere, and we allow more people to learn. I think that's a priority that the people in the United States can take right now, expanding more opportunities for people to learn. But don't think that I invented this idea of free speech. Let's look at what Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter had to say about free speech. He said, quote, "One of the prerogatives of American citizenship is the right to criticize public men and measures. And that means not only informed and responsible criticism, but the freedom to speak foolishly and without moderation," unquote. The speak foolishly and without moderation, unquote, is the most important part of this phrase. There have been clarifications. For example, in the Brandenburg v. Ohio Supreme Court case, any language that threatens someone's life, essentially any language that produces, quote, imminent lawless action and is likely to produce such action is not free speech. Now, the good news is that the vast majority of Americans do not subscribe to political correctness. But I think we also need to work hard to ensure that this does not become an institutional threat, like what we're seeing right now with so many colleges and universities. And I'm willing to make a simple bet with you. I bet that in the near future, I'm not sure when, not going to give a specific date or even an approximate time frame, but I think soon enough, maybe sometime before the end of this decade, by the year 2030, for convenience purposes, I think people are going to be so fed up with the nonsense and the utter garbage that's coming out from these institutions. There's going to be, I think, a kind of disillusionment, a mass disillusionment. And maybe we'll see a shift in how people learn. Maybe colleges will be prioritizing certain types of education, ones that require a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, a PhD, and hopefully there will be more opportunities for people to broaden their education, maybe to attend trade school or do an apprenticeship. I remember speaking with a friend of mine, and after almost 3 or 4 years of college, he realized that he should have been at a trade school. He would have had a much better time. He would have learned so much more. He would have concentrated a lot more on his passion and his expertise if he had gone to trade school than if he had gone to a standard university. Now, this is not to disparage all universities. I certainly am someone who went to university, and I found that there were a number of key lessons that I learned. But I really do believe that universities and colleges are not for everybody, and that's all right. I think we need to get away from this culture where we think that anyone who goes to a university or a college is somewhat inherently better than everyone, because that is not the case. Now, as a little fun and mockery, I highly encourage you all to watch the video called Education. It's EduCashun. It's a bit of drama, but at the same time, it's not really drama, I guess, depending on your experiences and your observations. I really think there is a lot of truth in how the video portrays these so-called SJWs, social justice warriors, who are the ones that are always triggered on college campuses and all that. It's really a hilarious video. As far as its persuasiveness, I'm not sure how persuasive it really is, but I think it's a good source of entertainment and mockery to watch. And I'll link that in the show notes below as well, along with the video of President Obama talking about free speech on college campuses. But I'm also going to link a video of President Trump talking about college campuses as well, just to really show that this really is a bipartisan issue. And I'm really hoping that both sides of the aisle can come together, set aside political differences, and tackle this head on. Because boy, are we going to love it. Just imagine what kind of a world it could be when our schools serve their purpose of expanding people's minds, expanding people's strengths and skills. Imagine a college campus where people from both sides of the aisle can do whatever they want to promote their points of view, but have active dialogue. Maybe hold events together that might not be related with politics. I love to see the college Democrats and the college Republicans on College Campus X holding a fundraising event for promoting free speech. Maybe that's a project that could be worked on. I love to see college administrators and instructors being held accountable. It's not that they can't have their own personal perspectives and personal views, but if there was any instance of an administrator or of an instructor trying to impose a particular ideology, I think these people should be held accountable. But maybe not from the university. Better yet, I hope that students, parents, other instructors, other administrators, lawmakers come together to denounce and to ensure that we have a real sustainable climate of learning. But the biggest conclusion that we can get from this, which is, what is good education? First of all, we have to accept that learning is a lifelong pursuit. No one will ever stop learning. People will always acquire new knowledge, will always acquire new skills. It's inevitable. Second thing is, if we want to have good education, we have to ensure that education for our youth is one of the single greatest things we can do for the next generation. Because the kids who grow up in our schools, in our homes, will be the future leaders, will be the future caretakers of our nation. George Washington, but countless other educators and lawmakers and influencers have said the same thing. We need to teach kids the science of government. We need to teach them civics. But I don't think we should be teaching them civics based on the facts and the figures, because no one wants to learn that. No one wants to learn a bunch of useless facts and figures. I propose that we should be teaching civics through stories. And not one-sided stories, but just stories that help illustrate the importance of voting, the importance of the House of Representatives and the Senate, the importance of the president. I don't think a lot of people might understand what the president can or can't do. But I'm not going to blame it on the people. I really think that it should be up to lawmakers, it should be up to educators to determine how we can best inspire kids to truly become future voters and to become part of the democratic process, because we need them. A democratic process that leaves future generations out is a democracy that cannot stand. So my hope is that something revolutionary will happen in terms of the new way of learning civics. Let's think about the role of education at home, learning about family values, about selflessness, about love, about marriage, the essential building blocks of any family, of any generation. I think learning at home has been one of the greatest treasures that I can ever have. I'm not just saying that because many people are at home as we're speaking right now, whether on online classes or staying home just to remain safe and to work productively from home. I also speak about this because I was homeschooled, and I'll never forget those moments when you're learning at home, when you're taking initiative and you're learning by yourself, you're reflecting without anyone telling you how to think or what to think. It is a really interesting self-reflection exercise. If you can, I highly recommend asking your best friend or a family member, ask them to share a bit about their family, about what their home is like, and what they can learn about you, about the kind of environment you live in. Because perhaps one of the greatest misconceptions about politics is that people are just a vote, that they're just a combination of political ideologies, of some kind of facts that don't match with mine, or that they don't subscribe to a worldview which I have. Unfortunately, that is the wrong way to look at people. People are shaped by experiences. That's why on this podcast and in many other venues, we promote dialogue. We promote getting people to know each other, getting to know how they grew up. What kinds of experiences did they go through that shaped the way they view the world? Maybe someone votes a particular way because they've had 6 generations of family that have voted the same exact way. Maybe it's because someone had a particular occupation, and for whatever reason that occupation is no longer viable, and they feel a particular sentiment about it. Perhaps someone had gone through a number of obstacles within their family, and they really need someone to be there to listen to them and to be there for them when their family may or may not be able to. I bring this up because I've noticed that when I meet people, and when all of you meet people, and you meet someone new, you don't know where this person comes from. You don't know what this person has gone through in their lives. best we can do is just try to get to know them. I think that's the case for many, many people. Sometimes it will not be viable for that to happen, but we try. I think we at least try and attempt to bond with as many people as we can. Some people will bond with us, some people will not, and that's all right. As long as we exhibit values of goodness and of openness and of understanding, I think we have done what we can. And go back to this idea about knowledge and acquiring expertise. There's really one central aspect that I think needs to be mentioned, which is that we can acquire all the knowledge we want and all the knowledge and expertise we can. But at the end of the day, I think it's about application. Maybe good education is the pursuit of knowledge, but maybe great education is the pursuit of wisdom. Maybe the reason why some people can prevail so well is because they not only learned what they've had to learn, but they've applied that as well. As the saying goes, actions speak louder than words. If we can apply good knowledge into our actions, then it shows that we care about what we say and what we think. And we care about it enough to make the world a better place. We could have the best resources, the best schools, the most data, but if we never apply them, or we never get to use them, then it's completely worthless. We also need to value character. The philosopher Aristotle once said, quote, "Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all," unquote. And we know that there are countless people out there with great hearts and great characters who are so willing to get out there and to do what is right. We just need to apply. We need to apply those great values. That's why I want to see more people out there pushing for free speech, pushing for civil discourse, pushing those ideas out there, and to not be afraid to speak out for what is right, even if it's not the easiest thing to do. Each and every single one of us has the capacity to learn and to promote more educational opportunities for other people. It may not be just educational opportunities in terms of schooling or in terms of instruction, but just new ways of constructive thinking or reaching out to people, getting to know them better, or reaching out to those who might be looking for new sources of information. I think we can all be there for each other in that regard. And so to recap, education is a cultivation. We are constantly finding new ways to find additional information. Maybe the internet has done that in many ways. It certainly has provided a lot more information. The real question is how much and how good can we disseminate that information? And as it's a cultivation process, we need to have great institutions. We need to have great schools. We need to have leaders who show by good example to the best of their ability, to set aside the politics perhaps, and to show that good example for constituents. But unfortunately, we are living at a time when many school institutions, including college campuses, but not limited to them, are unfortunately becoming echo chambers. We've got to protect our schools. We have to protect them as the epitome of free speech, not just for college campuses in general, but for the nation. And lastly, education needs to be applied. We have to open more opportunities for people to learn, whether it's a bachelor's degree in political science or perhaps at a trade school where people can learn carpentry. Let's give people more options and more opportunities to pursue education and to give back to society in the best way they can and want to. And perhaps the greatest exercise of education is to have wisdom, is to have great judgment on what is right and what is good. Having that difference between knowing what is right and what is wrong. And I know that when we explore together more topics on this podcast and beyond, on subjects that improve our understanding of education and how we make our education system better, then we can have more faith and confidence that our country's on the right path. It's a long journey of learning, but I could not be more grateful to all of you listening to me every week. I'm really pleased that we are learning this together. It's not just about me. I think it's all of us. I really do. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't wait to explore more topics with you as we go along. Remember, every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern, each weekly episode will be available for you to listen across the entire world. Thank you so much again. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great week. And I'll see you next time.